Amina Rahman was the picture of obedience, the perfect Muslim wife in a quiet Detroit suburb. Farouk Siddiqui, her father-in-law, was a respected elder, devout and disciplined. But behind closed doors, their secret affair ignited a chain of betrayal that ended with Omar Siddiqui, Amina's husband and Farouk's only son, lying dead at the bottom of the stairs. What began as stolen glances turned into a deadly conspiracy, shaking a family and their community to its core. In a quiet neighborhood, on the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan, the Siddiqui family was seen as a model of tradition and unity. The family consisted of Farouk Siddiqui, a retired small business owner known for his calm demeanor and devotion to his faith, his wife Nasima, a soft-spoken woman active in the local mosque community, and their only son, Omar. Omar was in his early 30s, a successful electrical engineer with a steady job and a reputation for being polite, focused, and responsible. In 2021, Omar married Amina Rahman, a 24-year-old woman from a respected family in Dearborn. The marriage had been arranged by both families, a common practice among many Muslim households, and it was celebrated with modest grandeur. Friends and relatives described the wedding as a union of two compatible souls, bound by shared values and a promising future. After the wedding, Amina moved into the Siddiqui home, as tradition often encouraged the bride to live with her husband's family. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. Amina was quiet and respectful. She quickly adapted to the household routine, helping Nasima with cooking, managing the home while Omar was at work, and attending religious gatherings on the weekends. She dressed modestly, prayed regularly, and was well-mannered with guests. To outsiders, she appeared to be the perfect daughter-in-law. The Siddiqui family, already admired in the local community, now seemed even more complete. Despite the harmonious image, the family dynamics began to shift subtly. Farouk, who had been more of a background figure after retirement, started spending more time at home, often sitting in the living room, reading or walking in the garden. Amina would occasionally join him for tea or help with minor errands. At first, these moments went unnoticed. Amina's conversations with her father-in-law appeared innocent, discussions about religion, family, and adjusting to married life. Nasima was content, Omar was busy, and Farouk seemed pleased to have someone who listened to his stories. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Amina was growing increasingly isolated. Though married, she spent long stretches of the day alone, waiting for Omar to return. Their interactions became brief and routine, lacking the warmth expected of newlyweds. Omar was frequently away on assignments or working late, and when home, he was tired or distracted. Amina didn't complain. She maintained a quiet composure. But that silence masked a growing emotional void. It was in those silent hours that her connection with Farouk began to deepen. No one in the family suspected anything unusual. Amina and Farouk kept their interactions discreet and seemingly respectful. Yet behind the closed doors of their home, a dangerous closeness was forming. What had started as a simple bond between in-laws was slowly evolving into something neither of them could control. As time passed, the Siddiqui home, once filled with prayer and peace, was unknowingly becoming the stage for a tragedy that would destroy everything it stood for. The perfect family image remained intact for now, but the seeds of betrayal had already been sown. The emotional distance between Amina and Omar continued to grow in the months following their marriage. Though Omar provided for her and treated her with respect, there was a noticeable lack of intimacy and connection. Their marriage, while stable on the surface, lacked warmth. Omar was a man of routine and discipline. His days were consumed by his work, and his nights were often spent catching up on reports or attending late meetings. He believed he was being a good husband by securing their future, unaware that the emotional needs of his wife were slowly going unmet. Amina, still adjusting to her new life, began feeling increasingly isolated. Her parents lived far enough that visits were rare, and most of her days were spent inside the Siddiqui home. Though she had a polite relationship with her mother-in-law Nasima, they shared little in common beyond household duties. What Amina craved wasn't just companionship, but attention, a sense of being seen and valued. And unexpectedly, it was Farouk who began to notice her more than anyone else. Farouk, though nearly twice her age, had a certain quiet charm. He was a good listener, and unlike the others in the house, he seemed to appreciate Amina's thoughts. Their conversations, which began with mundane topics, started to venture into more personal territory. He would compliment her cooking, ask about her childhood, or offer advice that felt more thoughtful than necessary. Amina, starved for emotional connection, found comfort in his words. What started as innocent companionship gradually turned into a secret attachment. The boundaries blurred slowly. A lingering glance here, a hand held too long there. They both knew what was happening was wrong, but neither pulled away. The secrecy added to the thrill, and the guilt was carefully tucked. Away beneath layers of rationalization, they convinced themselves that no one was being hurt, that this connection, however forbidden, gave them both something they lacked. It wasn't long before the emotional affair turned physical. In stolen moments during quiet afternoons, they would meet behind closed doors. They became skilled at hiding their involvement, carefully erasing messages, keeping their encounters short, and never leaving behind evidence. The danger of being discovered only fueled their desire. The tension between right and wrong had dissolved into a haze of passion and deceit. Omar, unsuspecting and distracted by work, noticed little at first. Farouk maintained his image of a wise religious elder. Amina continued playing the role of dutiful wife and daughter-in-law. To outsiders, the Siddiqui family remained a picture of harmony, but within the walls of their home, a dangerous secret festered, one that could never remain hidden forever. As the affair deepened, Amina and Farouk began to talk about the future. What if Omar found out? What if Nasima suspected something? Their answers varied, but one thing became clear. They would do anything to protect what they had, even if it meant destroying the very family that once held them together. Omar Siddiqui was never a man prone to suspicion. He trusted easily, especially those closest to him. For months, he brushed off his growing unease at home. Amina had become distant, but he attributed it to the stress of adjusting to married life. His father, once quiet and reserved, now seemed more present, always around, always engaging with Amina. Still, Omar didn't want to think the worst. He told himself it was just his imagination. But small details began to trouble him. He noticed Amina's phone was always within arm's reach, and she would tense up when he entered the room. Once, he came home early from work and found Farouk and Amina sitting unusually close in the living room. They jumped apart the moment they saw him, their faces flushed with a nervous energy that didn't match the situation. Omar laughed it off at the time, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That seed grew over the next few weeks. Amina had become more careful with her actions, but it was her emotional withdrawal that gave her away. She barely looked at Omar during meals, avoided physical contact, and no longer made the effort to talk. When he asked if she was unhappy, she insisted she was just tired. Still, something felt wrong, too wrong to ignore any longer. One afternoon, while Amina was out, grocery shopping, Omar decided to check her old phone, which she had left behind when she upgraded. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, But what he found left him speechless. Though many messages had been deleted, a few remained, intimate, suggestive messages that referenced meetings and shared secrets. The contact was saved under a generic name, but the writing style and details made it obvious. The messages were from Farouk. Omar felt a wave of disbelief, then rage. He sat in silence, staring at the screen. His mind reeled as he tried to process what he had just discovered. The betrayal was unimaginable, not just by his wife, but by his own father. That night, he didn't confront either of them. Instead, he started gathering evidence. Over the next week, he copied messages, took photos of anything suspicious, and began recording conversations. He planned to expose them, not with emotion, but with undeniable proof. His next step was to speak with his mother. Nasima had always been level-headed, and he believed she would support him. He also considered going to the local imam, someone the family respected deeply, to mediate the situation. But fate would not give him that chance. Omar's behavior changed too, though subtly. He stopped speaking as much at home, avoided eye contact with his father, and spent more time alone in his room. Amina noticed. Farouk did too. The tension in the house thickened. Amina, sensing the walls closing in, began to panic. She spoke, with Farouk in hushed tones behind closed doors. They feared exposure, but more than that, they feared losing the control they had clung to for so long. Something had to be done, and before Omar could act, a plan was already forming in the shadows, one that would ensure he never got the chance to reveal the truth. It was a stormy Friday evening when everything fell apart. The sky had been dark all day, and rain pounded against the windows of the Siddiqui home. Inside, the atmosphere was just as heavy. Omar had spent most of the afternoon in his room reviewing the evidence he had gathered. Screenshots of text messages, audio recordings, and photos he had taken over the past week. His mind raced with what to do next. He knew confronting Amina or Farouk directly would lead nowhere. He needed a proper plan, one that would bring the truth out into the open without spiraling into chaos. But Omar wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Amina had grown increasingly anxious in recent days. She could sense Omar's suspicion. He had become cold and distant, and though he hadn't said a word about what he knew, his silence spoke volumes. Farouk, too, had noticed. The shared glances, the careful words, the avoidance, all pointed to one conclusion: Omar knew everything. In the quiet tension of that evening, Amina placed a call to Farouk. They spoke briefly and cryptically, but the tone was serious. They both feared exposure, and Farouk, despite his composed nature, had grown desperate. What they shared was already a sin in the eyes of their community and their faith. But if it became public, the disgrace would be unbearable. Farouk's reputation would be ruined. Amina would be cast out, her family forever shamed. In their minds, they had no options left. Later that night, the police received a 911 call. The voice on the line was frantic, female, and barely coherent. She claimed her husband had fallen down the stairs. By the time first responders arrived at the Siddiqui home, it was already too late. Omar was lying motionless at the bottom of the staircase, his head tilted unnaturally to the side. A pool of blood had collected beneath him. A kitchen knife was found on the floor nearby, wiped clean, but clearly out of place. Amina was hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably. She told the officers that Omar had tripped while coming down the stairs. He had been tired, she said, and must have lost his balance. Her story was simple, but it didn't sit well with investigators. The scene felt too controlled, two-staged. The knife on the floor raised immediate questions. Why was it there at all if this had been an accident? And why was it spotless? The autopsy revealed the truth. Omar had not died from a fall. He had multiple stab wounds in his back and side, injuries that could not be explained by a staircase accident. The cause of death was sharp force trauma, not blunt impact. The fall had likely occurred after he was already fatally wounded. As detectives dug deeper, cracks in Amina's story widened. They examined phone records, computer activity, and eventually uncovered fragments of deleted messages between Amina and Farouk. The tone was urgent. One message, partially recovered, read, "He's going to destroy everything. We have to stop him." What had seemed like a tragic household accident quickly evolved into a full-scale homicide investigation. Amina and Farouk, who had carefully concealed their affair for months, were now at the center of a murder case, and the truth was about to be exposed. The investigation into Omar's death moved quickly. The forensic evidence alone told a story, far different from the one Amina had given the night of the incident. The stab wounds, clean, deliberate, and forceful, suggested intent, not accident. Investigators began piecing together the sequence of events, and what they found painted a chilling picture of betrayal and premeditation. Detectives secured a warrant to search the Siddiqui home and both Amina and Farouk's digital devices. What they recovered from Amina's phone confirmed their growing suspicions. Though many messages had been deleted, fragments remained, enough to establish the existence of a long-standing affair. Voice memos and message logs hinted at something even more sinister. Conversations about Omar becoming a problem, a threat to their secret, and discussions that implied they were planning to take drastic measures to keep it from coming to light. Farouk was brought in for questioning. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had been at the mosque at the time of the incident, but surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera placed him near the house during the window of time when Omar was killed. He had no explanation. Investigators also discovered inconsistencies in his story, minor details that contradicted what Amina had told them. Faced with mounting pressure, Amina cracked first. In a recorded confession, she admitted to the affair, but claimed she was emotionally manipulated by Farouk. She described him as controlling and persuasive, someone who had taken advantage of her loneliness and youth. According to her, the murder was not pre-planned, but a desperate act that spiraled out of control. She alleged that Farouk had initiated the stabbing after Omar confronted them, and that she had panicked, calling 911 only after realizing Omar was dead. Farouk, when confronted with her statement, denied everything. He claimed Amina was trying to save herself by placing the blame on him. He insisted that whatever relationship they had was one-sided, that he had never touched her, and that Omar's death was a tragic accident. The case became a battle of narratives, each pointing the finger at the other. The trial began months later, drawing significant media attention. The courtroom was filled with relatives, neighbors, and members of the local mosque community. The prosecution laid out a timeline, supported by digital records, forensic evidence, and Amina's own confession. The defense tried to argue that the affair had never happened, or that, if it had no connection to the murder. Ultimately, the jury saw through the lies. Amina was convicted of second-degree murder. The court acknowledged her emotional vulnerability but found her actions deliberate and reckless. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Farouk was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. He received a 30-year sentence. Neither showed visible remorse as the verdicts were read. In the end, a family that once stood as a symbol of tradition and dignity had been torn apart by lies, lust, and murder. Omar's death became a haunting reminder of how betrayal can hide behind even the most familiar faces, and how secrets, no matter how well buried, always find a way to the surface.